Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we are, of course, going to have an incredible episode for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy it, and we've got a ton of topics to talk about today. For some reason, there was just a ton of news that happened last week and over the weekend that I just have to discuss today. Last week we didn't have as many topics to discuss, but we made do. But today we have a ton of topics to talk about with you guys. So hopefully you enjoy that. And actually, I'm going to start off with Cognitive Elite questions because one of our many valued Cognitive Elite members asked two questions of two topics that I wanted to address first. So I'll just merge those things together because I was already going to discuss them, but I'll make them as Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com, and make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. So our good friend Cargo Shorts Respecter sent along two questions. The first question was asking about SVB bank collapse. He was wondering to know, do you have any thoughts on the SVB collapse? It's pretty telling that a bank run by diversity hires and women would just collapse. Well, that's a very good, observation there with what's going on with SVB. Silicon Valley Bank, of course, was a very woke bank. They're all into the DEI stuff and supporting LGBT causes and every woke thing that they were part of. That was it. And a lot of people are making the accusation that a lot of the reason why SVB is collapsing is due to this diversity obsession, this woke obsession among a lot of these corporations. And I think that's a fair point, as they were involved in that. And I think a lot of the people who were running the bank maybe weren't focusing on the real issues. They were focusing on how they can better increase diversity. And also most of their clientele was Silicon Valley, big tech. They're very woke as well. And so maybe they were handing out, providing financial support to a lot of these companies that were, diversity startups that should have had no business and being in business, but they were going to support them anyway. And yeah, so there's a little bit of that. But I mean, the larger issue, I think it's fine for the right to bring this up and to say, like, this is going to be a bank failure. Like these policies that they're going to have about rewarding minorities who are giving out loans and are allowing them to open up accounts and all these types of things when they pose a lot of risk. But the reason why we want more of them banking or getting loans or having their business supported or being elevated in the corporation or the bank is because we're so driven by this diversity obsession and meeting racial quotas and making sure Black Lives Matter and all this woke shit. I think that's a fair point. But I mean, the real issue, if we're talking amongst ourselves, is what caused it is not quite that, even though it may have played some role, and I think it's fine to bring that role up because that could play a role in other banks or other corporations going belly up and causing financial problems or economic problems for the country as a whole. But the real issue is that the Feds raised interest rates and the bank had all its assets in the bond, most of its assets in the bond market. Those are tied to interest rates. Once those interest rates are gone up, their assets lose their value. And a lot of these companies also got hurt by interest rate hikes because a lot of them were involved in the crypto exchanges and other things. And so a lot of their, people who had money in there, their money was lost value, and also the bank's assets lost value due to the interest rates. And then, when the rumors started to emerge that, the bank was failing, there was the largest bank run in history on the bank. And obviously this created a massive shitstorm that led to the bank's current situation. And a lot of also the companies that were dealing business with the SVB are these worthless startups. I mean, there's just so many idiotic tech startups out there that have no real value, that are just like somebody, managed to bamboozle some investors to give them money. And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this. I'm creating an app to organize your socks or something extremely stupid like that. I was seeing one example, like there's some like young woman. This woman has to be even like probably early 20s, who has some like tech thing where it's like providing like rape kits or something to like private like people who like sororities or something. It's like very niche, and like the woman herself is like posting bikini pics and stuff. It's like not a serious business at all, and it has zero like clients, zero like business. It's just there to exist as this vanity project for this young girl who bamboozled people into investing in her. And there's a lot of companies like this. And it gives her it allows her to play businessman and allows her to be like, I'm a successful entrepreneur and I'm posting bikini shots. And it's like, she did this in response to somebody's like, if you're invested in a company where the CEO starts posting bikini shots, it's time to get your money out of there. And she's like, oh, really? And she proved her point because they have literally no business. And so there's all this stupid things. I don't know if she was invested in SVB, but there's a lot of companies like that. So a lot of them just don't have any value. And a lot of them, big tech is a massive bubble. And a lot of these companies are just, not doing well right now. And due to the high interest rates and other factors, it's the bank that they were running went belly up. I think, you could say that some of these companies, a lot of the people that they were elevating were just being elevated because they're a woman or because they're a minority, and like, we're just going to let these people be in charge of the bank, and that they know, and maybe they were complete idiots at their job because they're elevated past their point. But I mean, the larger issue was the raise in interest rates for that, and the industry itself that they represent is going through a tough time right now, and also in part due to the raise in interest rates. So that is that's my thoughts on it. I think it's a fair point. I think if we're going to see other bank failures, I think the diversity issue probably will play a greater role, because all of these banks are returning to the pre-2008 policies where they're just handing out loans to minority, home buyers who shouldn't be getting loans. And this was a major cause for the Great Recession, is that, George W. Bush and these banks conspired together, and they're like, we're going to raise minority home ownership. Well, they did that, but then all these people couldn't pay back their loans, and thus in part created the Great Recession, because none of these people were, all these banks were having the similar problem of getting that cash flow in, and they were screwed. And it's going to be the same thing happening now, is that they're like, we're giving special loans to minorities, whether it's to start their own business or buy a home or buy a car. We're giving, if you're a minority, you're going to get a special deal on loans. And it's like, we've seen this story play out. We saw the story play out in the 2000s, and that's what caused the Great Recession. And they're also, pairing that with like greater minority representation in the companies, racial quotas, where they're elevating people into higher positions that they shouldn't be there, but just because of their race or gender. And I think that's going to play a major role. And we're definitely going to see some more bank failures over this decade due to these idiotic policies that they're pursuing in response to the George Floyd revolution, and how we've got to ensure that racial equity is there. You're definitely going to see these types of failures later on in this decade, and that's definitely going to be caused by this obsession with DEI policies. So I think that's a fair point, and I think you can make that connection, saying like, well, you're looking at SVB, it may be due to the interest rates. That's the direct cause, but they also had the same conditions that is the same for all these other banks, and that's going to lead to risky loans and people not paying back their loans, incompetent people managing this operation, all these other problems, and it's all due to that diversity hires and that, special loan offerings for minorities that they're having. So as I keep saying, that's a fine point to bring up. I think there's another interesting observation about the SVB collapse, is that there's been a divide on the right over whether to give them a bailout, and they're sort of getting a bailout. I mean, all the depositors, the federal government is saying that they'll be insured, even though the FDIC only insures up to $250,000. They're expanding it for all depositors, that those will be covered by the federal government. And that's just to stop a bank run, and they were worried that this bank run would go to other banks as well. And they're just really trying to calm down the public and say like, look, don't do a bank run. It's really just a way of them just saying like, stop, like, we're not going to allow this. I don't know whether it's going to fully go through. I think they just announced the news just to stop a bank run and let the market settle. And then maybe if like they don't go full through it for whatever reason, or it's going to cost taxpayer money, as they're saying like, this is going to cost the taxpayers any money. It's like, what? Of course it is. It's the federal government insuring it. That's of course going to, the taxpayers of course going to be paid for it. Who else is going to pay for it? And I mean, I guess unless they're planning on printing money or whatever their solution is. it's obviously going to come out of the taxpayers' pocket, not the taxpayers' dollar. But I think the whole point is just to calm down the market, which is a smart move. I mean, you're seeing bank runs starting on other banks, and other banks lost a lot of value after the SVB news came out at the end of last week. So it's a smart move on the part of the federal government to get ahead of this. But going on to the political implications of the bank and whether the debate over a bailout and what should happen, and the Biden administration coming in and saying we're going to do this type of security for the bank, I think it raises some interesting questions. But the right's response was, as I said, was divided. Is that there was a lot of people who are like, we have to bail them out because our economy depends on it. There's going to be a massive economic collapse if this happens. Like, we already did bailouts before, let's do them again. And others are like, no, we don't want to bail out woke big tech and Silicon Valley, is that they made all these bad decisions where they have to pay for them. And so there's this real divide going on. But I do find it funny that a lot of the people who are arguing for a bailout present themselves as populists, and that they very critical of the 2008 bailouts, which the 2008 bailouts, for however bad they were and, unseemly, they appeared to the public as like, look, these guys made a ton of bad decisions, and then the government came and bailed them out, so they didn't have to pay for those decisions. The unfortunate fact is, if we hadn't done a bailout, like, the economy would have collapsed. And, some people are like, let's let the economy collapse because, I'll get to be a warlord or something for whatever, all these fantasies that people have. But I mean, it would be bad for most people if the economy collapsed. And I don't think something better would emerge from that. Maybe something would, but if you're so I don't think you can also be a Republican or elected official and be like, my official stance is collapse and millions of starving to death. And I don't think that would work as a political pitch. So a lot more of the economy was dependent on those bailouts in 2008, which now it's not quite to the extent, but they were trying to make it to the extent, is that there was a lot of doom and gloom. There's like, this whole thing's going to collapse. Everyone's doing a bank run, and they're trying to amp up the hysteria in order to get people to make a run on the banks, so that there is so much economic volatility that the feds would come in and offer a bailout to SVB, and it worked. A lot of these powerful tech guys, manipulated the market and manipulated the news cycle to get what they wanted, and they succeeded. For the left, the bailout makes sense because big tech is, a huge donor for the left. Even though the left has an uncomfortable relationship with tech, a lot of these guys criticize, the big tech platforms. They're like, they're spreading hate speech. We don't like this. Even though they all like certain companies, I mean, they all love Google. Even though they sometimes say it's too big and whatever, but Google gives them so much money and supports so much of their power. They're very critical of Facebook, well, now known as Meta. They're obviously critical of Twitter now. And they've been critical of Amazon and stuff, but they have, all these companies and a lot of the people involved in the tech industry give them a ton of money. They have a lot of power over the left, and, they support left-wing causes. I mean, a huge reason that our country's gone so left-wing is because of the tech industry and the prevalence of social media and the internet. So they should have give them a thank you, even though they sometimes want more regulations and some antitrust initiatives to go in their manner, and for them to completely end hate speech. They still have a cozy relationship with big tech. For the right, it's a little bit weirder because, over the last, ever since Trump was elected, so 6 years ago, over the last 6 years or so, they've had a much more tense relationship with the right, even though the right has ended all these regulations and in previous years was opposed to antitrust initiatives and other things. They've done a lot of good for the big tech's bottom line, but big tech has done everything possible to censor right-wing thought and to ensure Republicans can't win elections. So there's now much more of a conflicting relationship with him. But I think a lot of Republicans are opposed to a bailout, the elected Republicans. So it's mainly a debate within conservative commentariat over whether they should give the bailout. And a lot of the arguments just come down to, there's a few tech guys who are right-wing, who are based, and these guys don't have their interests tied in with the bank. And due to that, we now want to bail out in order to to be in good terms with these guys who are involved in the SVB crisis. Because if you see David Sachs, who's become almost a type of, I wouldn't say quite an Elon Musk figure, but he's become very popular in right-wing circles. He's a huge DeSantis supporter. Apparently, he's very influential in DeSantis' world. And a lot of conservatives now like him a lot. And he has a lot of financial interest staked into SVB, and he's been arguing for a bailout. And I think a lot of people in turn have been arguing for that. I mean, it's like fine if it's like, okay, this guy is based and, maybe he'll spread more money around if we, support this. I understand that point of view, but I don't really, I can see some people just like, well, we want to, some of the arguments is like, well, we need to calm down the market, maybe this is not the fault of the depositors, it's the fault of the bank, with this. And that's why we need a bailout. But a lot of it is a little bit too noticeable about the real reasons some of these guys are. And it's just that they want to support these right-wing tech guys who have financial stake in SVB and others. So that's like fine, but others don't want to do that because of traditional norms that they see the big tech as a problem, as a woke behemoth, and that it's good to make these companies, hurt, especially with all these ridiculous tech startups and the type of business model that a lot of Silicon Valley is pursuing, and a lot of the business model that SVB was helping to support, and that it needs to go belly up. And so a lot of these guys have that opinion that we need to punish our enemies, and these are our enemies, and others are like, well, it's not quite our enemies, it's the market. And so you have that debate going on over there. I do notice a lot of the people from the traditional finance world, watching like CNBC and seeing like Bloomberg reports or stuff, they're a little bit more skeptical of a bailout and a little bit harder on it. And they're like, look, they had a terrible business model. This is how the market works. There's winners and losers. The government should pick winners and losers. I even saw someone, Vivek Ramaswamy, which the podcast has all had a lot of opinions on him. But Vivek was, who comes from a more traditional finance background, is very anti-big tech, was like they should absolutely not get a bailout. Like, this is ridiculous. They pursued idiotic business policies. They deserve to lose. And this is coming out of the taxpayer, and also this is a woke industry as well. This is why we shouldn't be bailing them out. This is a little bit of a different point from the topic at hand, but I am noticing something that's different between the tech world and the traditional business finance world. One thing is that a lot of these tech guys get into things that people would think are weird. You can look into Jack Dorsey's, experiment with Buddhism and these meditation camps or this stuff, and a lot of people are into that. Or all of Jeff Bezos' weird things that he wants to get into, or Mark Zuckerberg thinking about running for president or comparing himself to Caesar. Other people who have looked into how to ensure that they live forever, and all these type of weird things. It also allows a lot of these big tech executives, that they have a lot of once they make a lot of their money and, they're looking for something to get into, is that they get really into politics. And a lot of times they get into more dissident right stuff. I would say even like what the type of stuff that David Sachs is getting into, it's a very much centered around internet right-wing topics. And they get into that because a lot of these tech guys, they are nerds. I mean, that's fine that they're nerds. But, they don't have the normal hobbies that a lot of other men have. Like, most hobbies for normal men is like golf, sports, that type of thing. And they don't really have those hobbies. And once they're like established in life, they're like, they have a lot of free time on their hands, and they're more willing to get into ideas that normal society would find weird. And now that presents a benefit to some of the right wing, is that a lot of these guys who are very smart, very interested in ideas, and see a lot of things going wrong around the world, especially within their own industry, which is insanely woke and is very different from how they made their money 20 years ago, that they get into a lot of these ideas and they start promoting them. And so there's a number of people like that. Even though that's a minority of the tech industry, most of them get into these weird ass shit, like Sam Bankman-Fried's ethical altruism thing, or they get into polyamory, or just extremely weird left-wing causes. They decided to change their gender and stuff. It's like very weird stuff. While like guys in the traditional finance world are not getting into this stuff, they're just like going out and playing golf and like following. And especially in the business world, if you look at like CEOs of like all these successful companies, so like what are their hobbies? It's like supporting their college and their college sports team, golf. Mainly golf is like their big, and a lot of these guys still are interested in politics, but it's very traditional party politics. Like these are guys not reading Moldbug. I don't think like I'm trying to think of like, let's say that the CEO of Hardee's, the old CEO of Hardee's was like was fairly conservative in like a business first manner. But let's say like a guy who's like at a financial firm or something of that sort, they're not going to read Moldbug. They're going to, they might support Trump. They may support some like good stuff, but they're like, that's some weird ass shit. I just want to hit on the links. And that's like a big divide, I think, between the industries and stuff and like who people support. And I think even though a lot of big tech has been very disruptive for a lot of the world that the right wants to create and a lot of the big tech, I'm not saying this for the people who are right wing in the tech world, but a lot of the tech industry is for open borders. A lot of the tech industry is, as I said, into these weird ass ideas like polyamory and creating new religions and new age stuff. Their platforms upend traditional ways and norms, not just in America, obviously, but all throughout the world. Industry as a whole is very anti like trade protectionism and even just like the idea of a nation state. It just wants a completely globalized world. And so they're all into this stuff, and it probably even a little bit more. I mean, so is a lot of the traditional business and finance world as well. But due to the fact that there's a lot of these tech guys who doing to be more inquisitive types, more smarter types, who are more willing to engage in interesting ideas more than the average, wealthy demographic, that they become, the right wing becomes more supportive of the tech industry. Weirdly enough, certain people in the tech industry, due to the perception that more of these guys are going to get into our particular ideas, much more so than any other industry. Though if you looked at like the type of work environment in these industries, like the average tech company is going to be way woker, more left wing than the average, Wall Street firm. Even though the Wall Street firm is like on paper pursuing a lot of woke policies, and they are pursuing, I actually want to say this, they are pursuing a lot of this ESG stuff and also making sure these racial quotas. But the workplace firm, especially like those finance guys, especially at the lower levels, it's like not a woke place. And a lot of these guys, if you get them in a private conversation, they are not woke at all, while a lot of these tech people, unless they're really into right-wing stuff, they're going to be weird as shit and extremely left-wing. I don't think, the type of transgender, transhumanist types are probably not going to be found in a Wall Street firm. That's not to praise Wall Street firm. I just think it's a cultural difference. So that's a little bit of a side, but I just wanted to bring out that topic that maybe has a little bit to play in this. But those are my thoughts on SVP. Went on a little bit of a tangent there. Some people may disagree with my tangent at the end, but I think it's something worth pointing out and it's food for thought out there. So even though after 20 minutes, we still have a second question from Cargo Shorts Respecter. Cargo Shorts Respecter asked you some very good questions. And this one I was definitely planning on talking about, and I'm glad he brought this up. He said, Lindsey Graham is laying the groundwork for military intervention after some Magic Americans got capped by the cartel during a drug deal. Is this just posturing, or is this a sign that the neocons see Ukraine as a failing venture and are looking to pivot to Mexico? Do you think we should support military intervention against the cartels? If not, would this change under a Trump presidency? Well, I'm going to go on to the topic itself, but I'm going to answer the questions at first. Is this just posturing? Mostly just posturing. I don't think they see Ukraine as a failing venture. I think they look at this as a successful venture. I just think that the cartel kidnapping was the number one news topic last week. I was at the gym and the nightly news came on, like ABC Nightly News, and it was at the top of the show. It's like cartel kidnapping. And it was at the top of the show for like multiple days. Not only that, but like CNN and Fox News were covering it round the clock. It was the number one news story last week. And it was just Lindsey Graham and some Republicans like, hey, we want to make I think some of them have wanted military intervention due to the cartel problems and the fentanyl coming in and all the type of violence and illegal immigrants coming through, and they're like, let's have a military intervention, and that there's so much news attention being paid towards it that they decided this is an opportunity to argue for an invasion. I would say on the second part, they don't see Ukraine as a failing venture. I think they view it as a very successful venture at the moment. So I don't think they were wanting to pivot to Mexico. I think that they've just, some people have wanted more military intervention to Mexico due to the real problems we have there, and they've used this as a reason to posture for it. Do I support military intervention into Mexico? Yes, actually against the cartels. I mean, we should be using more of our military against it, even though the Mexican government doesn't want that. And the cartels are very much frightened by this. I mean, after the kidnapping, they offered up 5 guys. They're like, hey, these guys did it. We're very sorry. The Gulf Cartel, they're like, we don't want to mess with America. That does show a lot of legitimate fear of the American government on the part of the cartels, is that they would just, I mean, these guys are probably low-level guys that they would just shoot anyway, but it still shows a sign that they really don't want to piss off the American government. Even though that the people that they kidnapped were criminals themselves, or they may have been a drug deal gone wrong, they still were like, okay, we want to make sure to calm down the American government. So I would support some type of military intervention against the cartels. I mean, it is like a huge problem. We have a massive drug problem in this country, but a lot of things have just changed from them. But I'll just answer those questions with military intervention. Yes, I support that. And it is posturing on their part, but, I do think they genuinely want it, but I don't think it's because Ukraine is failing. But I'll go into this topic itself. This is one of the most comical news events that I've ever seen in America. I mean, it is like a real news event. I mean, there's been kidnappings and murders of Americans by cartels before. There was a Mormon family a few years back that got, murdered by people associated with the cartel. There was some drug business dealing going on with that, so they weren't completely innocent. But it was like a big problem. But that was not at the top of the news hour. That was not the number one news story when that happened. That was like a back page news story. I don't think that many, did not receive the wall-to-wall coverage that this did. And you have to wonder why. And it was already the top news before it was revealed who the 4 captives were. And once they were revealed, I don't want to say it's because they're black, but it has the impression on the American public that there was greater attention paid to this because they were black. Even though there was a ton of attention paid to this news story before it was clearly known that they were black. I mean, people thought, like tourists, they thought it was like spring breakers out there who took a wrong turn and they got abducted by the cartel. And that's obviously going to be a news story that people are going to want to follow. Instead, it turned out to be 4 very people with lengthy drug records who claimed they were just there for liposuction. I'm sure they were just there for their friend's liposuction, that they drove all the way from South Carolina. They gave up. Like, you have to think about how many days. I don't know if they were working or not, but they're like, hey, let's go on a vacation to Mexico so just one person get liposuction. And by the way, we all have extensive drug records and are all drug dealers. Yeah, let's do that. Something innocent. And we're all having to believe that this is just some innocent thing that they went over there. And it's like, it's clearly not. Like, these guys, and these weren't just like minor possession. Like, these people had like drug manufacture. The woman who was going through a liposuction, her kid had I believe methamphetamine, had been found with methamphetamine in her system. Like, these people were heavily involved in the drug trade. And they went to a place where you buy drugs in bulk. And so they're probably not there on an innocent excursion just for the tummy tuck of the woman's tummy tuck. I don't know how she could convince 3 men to come along with her either for that, but but people will believe it, and it's like very funny. Magic Americans come up with the most ridiculous stories and lies, and people are just like, yeah, that's totally true. It's the same with like what they did with Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, all these types of police shootings. It's like completely made up myth, and the media just buys it. And it's the same in this story. It's like, yeah, I don't believe you guys were there for. You guys were there for illegal activity. Now, according to reports, is that the cartel didn't kidnap. I mean, they clearly didn't have any money or something, and they mistook them as Haitian smugglers. rather than American smugglers or American drug dealers. And due to the massive amount of Haitians that have been coming through Mexico and a lot of that criminal underworld from Haiti coming into the country, I'm sure these cartels are really pissed off about these people coming into their territory, and thus they deal with them in the manner that they deem appropriate, obviously not a legal manner. And so that they, these 4 Magic Americans go down there for likely illegal purposes. We can't, allegedly illegal purposes, but one can deduce that it's likely they were not there for just purely legal means. And the cartels mistake them for another type of criminal that has been prevalent in Mexico and kidnaps them. And the fact the American government raises an almighty force and threatens to invade Mexico unless they hand over these Magic Americans and stop touching our Magic Americans and harming them. And the cartel, realizing the American might, apologizes and offers 5 of their own guys to the government as a way of apology for fucking around with our most valuable resource of Magic Americans, and they did not want to find out what happens when that occurs. I mean, just imagine how ridiculous it is. It's like we're sending in like Delta Force assassination squads for Mexico abducting 4 drug dealers. It's like just ridiculous that was like a possibility. As I previously said, I think in the public eye, this had already been a major news story and a major concern before it had been established that these were 4 black drug dealers who were the ones kidnapped. But the impression of the story is that the American public cares so deeply about Magic Americans, and so does the government, that we will threaten invasion of anyone who dares harm them, even if they are drug dealers out on something that is likely an illegal excursion or up to no good when they were in Mexico. That's not to say that they were, the cartels were right to do what they did. I mean, maybe they were just there for a tummy tuck. Even though I strongly doubt that, it still creates this impression that we will go use all our powers to do this. And you have to compare this with what's happened to other Americans, is that everyone was like, these guys are total victims. And these aren't even like Howard University graduates. Like, these are total hood rats. Like, they're interviewed their families. Like, even they interviewed like the wife of one of these guys. She's white, by the way, and she looked like a drug addict herself. The families, they're just like, this is like, man, I can't believe, like, this is clearly like a hood rat situation here. And what they were doing there is like, they're like, oh, they're so innocent victims. Like, and people got really mad when the Daily Mail reported on their criminal convictions. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Or is that racist? It's like, no, it's creating trying to explain why they may have gone to Mexico, to an area that was filled with cartel activity. And maybe the cartels offer something that these people have been engaged with most of their lives as a business enterprise. So I think that's legitimate to say that. But there's been compare this situation to that of Otto Warmbier. Otto Warmbier was a white guy who went to North Korea as like an adventurer. He got arrested there. He's tortured to death. And there were tons of liberals like, fuck around, find out. Look at this like white privilege guy learning his lesson. And Otto Warmbier was like, if you wanted a model for like someone who you would want to sympathize with and say like, we got to use all our power to help this guy out, Otto Warmbier was that. Now, North Korea is a little bit different situation from the cartels, but there was a lot more condemnation of this guy just because he was a tall, good-looking white kid who went to North Korea as like an adventurer, and like I think he did a prank of some sort, and he got arrested and got tortured to death. And there was all these liberals like, that's what you get, white boy. And while here they're like, oh, these precious little drug dealers, we've got to save them. Oh, my heart breaks for these people. And they all had ridiculous names too, like Latavia McGee. It's like, and they're drug dealers. And it's like, this has to be established. I mean, that's not like me an allegation, is that they have been arrested for involvement in the drug trade. Maybe you could say they're former drug dealers if you want to be precise. But yes, these are people who have been involved in drug dealing. And like, there is way more sympathy for these people than there was for poor Otto Warmbier. Warmbier, there was a lot of people who were condemning him. Like, nobody was condemning these people. They're like, they should be able to go in peace. So it's very much creates this impression that, the Afro-latry that I say is like, there's so much black worship in this country, and that no matter how you don't even need to create the like impression that these are like Denzel Washington blacks. So these are like the nice sort who can speak well and they've got their life together. They could just be straight up hood rats, and that we will, as a nation, we will demand invasion and wanting to send in Delta Force to execute any cartels who dare touch our black drug dealers. And that's what the impression that's created. It's very much a comical aspect. Is that for other countries where their nationals get kidnapped, they're usually like middle class people, tourists. Like they, have a sympathetic look. They're usually not like from the criminal element of society. So it creates a very ridiculous impression among it. And with that in mind, I think the America overreacted to this. We rescued them. Awesome! I'm glad we got our most precious resource back. But at the same time, it's like this is likely what criminals do. We're getting involved in criminal enterprise. Maybe they shouldn't touch our criminals. And they want to create an impression that they cannot go after any American citizen. But it is what it is. It's that's the nature of it. I don't think going to invade over these four would have been the most ridiculous war provocation in world history, war cause ever. And I'm glad we didn't invade over yet, even though I do support some type of military intervention over just the border itself or these drugs. Because cartels are involved in the human smuggling and all these other ills that are coming into this country, especially with fentanyl. And that brings it to the point where I was seeing people revive these arguments about how Americans, they're even people like David Frum, who's former conservatives who are just saying, "Oh, you guys blame the cartels. Well, the problem is Americans who are providing the demand. Is that they're just the cartels are just supplying the demand, and all these Americans are doing drugs, and that's bad. And we need to work on the demand problem rather than the supply problem." And that's been an old argument for long. Even if you saw the movie Traffic, which is now, well over 20 years old. I think it came out in 2000, which has that argument. It's like, well, we're providing the demand, and it's like these wealthy white people keep doing drugs, and that's what's causing all the violence. And people, they make that argument, but this is happening at a time when the war on drugs is over. Drug use is celebrated in America. One of the top movies in America right now is Cocaine Bear, where, cocaine use is celebrated. All these TV shows, sitcoms always talk about I'm doing coke, and they're like, that's awesome. And coke, drug use, all across the board is normalized. We have people who are 40 years old who've got they've got a family, they've got a normal job, and they're smoking weed every day. And there's a lot of people who are doing coke. There was a time, I think it was in New York City, where there were 3 people who died due to fentanyl or getting mixed in their cocaine, and all 3 of these people were normal people. These were not, even though cocaine use is usually associated with wealthy Wall Streeters and people like that, Patrick Bateman types. These 3 people were middle class types. And it's just so universal. And even among the media, all these journalists celebrate their own cocaine usage. They'll even write articles "Oh, we're doing coke. This is so awesome. This is awesome." And and then they're like, "But it's so bad that America does this." And it's you guys are all celebrating drug use. There's no more war on drugs. There's no part on the American government or the American elite to reduce drug usage. There's none. So this argument doesn't make any sense anymore because we encourage the demand, through our media, through what celebrated sports stars and personalities do. And cocaine use was very, very bad to have any association with that, back in the 80s and 90s. There's several football players to this day who are still tainted by allegations they use coke, and it really harmed their reputation. Joe Montana was accused of it. Dan Marino was accused of it, and it really hurt their reputations to be accused of that. Now today, a player would probably come out and hell yeah, I do coke, and they're like, let's sign this guy up. That's awesome, as long as it's not affecting his play. And so do these celebrities and stars. They really tout up that they do coke. And that's what's coming up here. And then the whole country is on drugs, some sort of drug too. And we would have never made a movie like Cocaine Bear in I'm not saying the movie is bad or that it's wow, this is outrageous that it's doing that, even though I am sort of It's a comedy movie. It's supposed to be offensive, but they would have not made that movie 30 years ago when, especially during the crack epidemic. Like, they would have not made a comedy movie about, like, how funny cocaine usage is. Like, they would have made it's like a dark movie about that. And, news sites, if they're writing advice columns, they'll talk about, like, oh, how to best deal with a cocaine hangover and stuff. I remember, like, Slate had an article 8 years ago on something like that, where just like casual and we mentioned like, oh, doing coke and like how you need to watch yourself and like how to make sure you don't have that bad of a hangover from it. And it's like 8 years ago. I mean, like the whole media is into it. So it's like the dumbest argument ever. Like there's no longer a real push to convince kids not to do drugs or convince people not to, like, people in general not to use drugs. Like, if anything, our country encourages more drug use, and it's incredibly stupid for us to, get on our high horse and like, this is actually America's fault. Well, like, this person who is making, I don't think David Fromm's doing coke, but David Fromm probably has a lot in his social circle who's doing coke, especially among the younger crowd. And that's just like a common thing. So it's like, we no longer have the war on drugs. Like, we encourage the demand and we refuse to eliminate the criminal elements of it. So we don't really even have a war on drugs anymore, in my opinion. But which we should. I still support it. I think drugs are bad. This is a controversial opinion in some circles, but no, the war on drugs is awesome. Like, let's talk about this. Like, I don't even see right wingers use like left wing talking points like, oh, it led to more people in jail. It's racist. There's so many innocent people. They found a guy with a weed joint and he went to jail for 10 years. It's like, that's all fucking bullshit. No, we put away a lot of dangerous criminals thanks to the war on drugs. And it's like, I don't care about any of these dumb arguments. And it's like, oh, the cartels. It's like, drugs are bad, first off. Like, let's say that. Like, stop doing drugs if you're doing drugs. As I always say, I will not smoke weed as a part of the Greer Pledge. But that includes a whole lot of other drugs. Like, we are anti-drug on this platform. And I'm tired of this type of tolerance for drug use or even encouragement of drug use. It's like really bad. It's like, it's just a way of like, we live in a decadent society, a degenerate society, and the way to cope with that is to just ingest all these drugs and to escape from it. No, we're not doing that. We're not going to escape. We're going to work towards ourselves and try to have a much better society than we live in. We're not going to wallow in drugs. And drug use is just bad. It's like, I don't care, especially when you get into harder drugs. It creates an addiction. It drains you of money. It ruins your health and life. You just shouldn't do it. This is like a DARE program here. Like, the last of the DARE programs is highly respected. I know a lot of people who wanted to do coke to look cool and to be cool. And, these are like media nerds. And they ruined their lives through it. They ruined their lives. They caused like family breakups, the mental health issues, lost a ton of money on it. They really did ruin their lives. And I know even other people have gotten into harder drugs, and it's never been a positive for them. And I'm very anti-drugs. The war on drugs, we need to bring back and make it harder and more pervasive. Like, even weed dealers, like, we need to put you at 10 years in jail. But even a lot of those drug convictions, like, I see this like on right-wingers, like, war on drugs was bad. I guess they do it because, like, some of these guys are libertarians and they still have residual libertarianism, or they like to think of everything the government does as bad, and thus they, condemn the war on drugs. But they're wrong. It was actually based. It's awesome. We need to bring it back and make it more forceful and use. And now we have the surveillance state to help us out. We need to put that surveillance state to good use. Instead of like targeting political dissidents and stuff, let's target drug users. Let's target potheads. Let's use it in good use. And even like these arguments, like let's legalize it. Like, California still has crime, and like it's a ton of shady people involved in the legal marijuana business in California. And there's been shootings and other stuff. Like, they still have crime involved in the industry. And it's like, and it's also terrible for those communities where they have like, it's a major weed industry there. Because obviously the people who are going to be involved in the weed industry are shitheads. And they come to these rural towns, like, there's still like some nice rural towns that are fairly conservative. And they come there and they bring their shitheadness, their degeneracy to that town. And they ruin the whole neighborhood. They ruin the whole community. And yeah, so We're no more legalization of marijuana. There was a very white pill from Oklahoma where they voted down the legalization of weed, and that was incredibly keyed. So we want more of that. We want to bring back the war on drugs. I'm going to do an IQ supplement on war on drugs someday, and it's going to be 100% positive. The only thing is that it didn't fully succeed, but there's some positive. I mean, like crime went down because of all this stuff that we were, these laws and things that we're doing with the war on drugs. And a lot of times like, oh, the crack, the incentivize, the harder sentences for crack dealers. Like, yeah, because crack dealers were involved in a whole lot more direct crime than cocaine dealers. Because, I mean, cocaine dealers were like a lot more international crime, obviously, because of the cartels, but their clientele were mostly wealthy. Crack, both are bad. I think both are bad, and I just want to point that out. But crack, it's like it was a street phenomenon. It was driving up robberies and these random homicides and muggings and all this type of lower quality of life than cocaine was, and that's why they raised it. But they're talking about it as racist. So we'll hold on to that thought. But I think it is ridiculous when people trot out these 30-year-old liberal talking points about the war on drugs, about like, well, we need to worry more about the demand, and all these people are doing drugs themselves and celebrating drug use. And like, I think you are encouraging the demand problem. So I just want to say that. But we've got a lot of other topics to discuss. I'm actually 45 minutes in, and we still have a couple of other things to mention. I'm going to have a rapid fire discussion of some other topics. One thing I want to bring up with the cartel thing, and this is pairing it in, is that the cartel fear of America does still indicate how powerful the globalist American empire is. A lot of people like to argue about this, like it's weakened. I had a guy who was, like saying like, oh, look, the Mexican president AMLO, he's criticizing America. This shows how weak the globalist American empire is. It's like, wow, a Latin American head of state criticizing America. We've never seen this before. That happens all the time. But even then, like Mexico and Latin America, they really do fear America more than anyone else. And when America shows the intention of invading or, showing military force to protect our magic drug dealers, these people cave in. They're like, oh, no, we're sorry. We're not going to do that. Here's some guys. We apologize. Even the cartels do this. But there was a setback for the gay from the Middle East last week, is that China brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, mortal enemies, to normalize relations, which is a big deal. They haven't had it for, I think they broke off all diplomatic contact. I think it was said 7 years ago, even though they've had much tenser relations for a long, long time. I mean, the Syrian war was a proxy war. It can be seen as a proxy war between the two. I mean, there's other powers that have been involved. I mean, regionally, obviously Israel and Turkey have been involved. But I mean, the two, and US and Russia have been involved. But the two main players, I think, foreign players, and seeing this war as like a battle between their interests, has been Saudi Arabia and Iran. And now that China, not America, but China has brokered a deal, that's like a big problem for America. And also, Saudi Arabia has been criticizing American power a lot more, even though we've always counted Saudi Arabia as an ally. Obviously, whether they're a true ally or not is a topic for another day. But now that they've not gone along with our sanctions against Russia, they've had cordial relations with Russia, they've been openly criticizing us, and, they've been doing, they rejected Biden's advances to produce more oil to help out with the energy supply. And now that they're cozying up with China and that they're normalizing relations with Iran, which is an enemy of America, that is a setback for the globalist American empire that this has happened. Now, the full implications of it are too early to determine, but I do want to say that is a setback, and there could be the example where the Middle East is, we left the Middle East under the impression that we had, taken care of all the rogue enemy states, that there was strong allies of ours in the Gulf, obviously Israel, and whether these are true allies or not is, of course, another matter. But, as what the globalist American empire thinks they are. But now we're seeing a lot more tension within the region, and even Turkey, trying to reject these Scandinavian countries coming to NATO because of Muslim or anti-Muhammad protests that they've been doing. And other things is that we don't really have a firm grip on the Middle East. And the Middle East seems more willing to want another foreign power to come in and to guide the region. And that could be China. And that may be to the liking of all these Middle Eastern powers. And that's something that the globalist American empire would definitely be worried about. Whether this is good for us or not is, I would not say it's good or bad. I wouldn't even go that far because it's something that is not related to the domestic situation, but it is something interesting on the international level. I don't buy these arguments that like, oh, the fact that Africa is not sanctioning Russia, this means the gay is weak. I usually don't buy that. But this I do think is an important sign, and the fact that China brokered it is very notable, and that is something the globalist American empire should worry about. We'll talk more about this subject later on. We've had so many other topics that I need to get to that are more pressing, and some of these are not as as highbrow or as global level, especially with the next topic we're going to talk about. So last week we had some very important good men scarcity updates, and people talk about the drug problem, but the real problem in America, of course, as all highly respected listeners know, is the good men scarcity problem. Is that it's driving all these poor innocent women to do OnlyFans, and they can't find a good man to marry, and it's really creating a ton of problems out there. So we've got to really update the viewers on what's going on. So there's two videos I want to bring. One video I want to bring a lot of attention to, and then the other I'll just bring up briefly. But I saw this clip on Twitter that somebody had, and it's from a Barstool podcast. And I've talked a little bit about Barstool, and particularly the negative effect it's had on women is that a lot of these women, it's turned them into very vulgar, like crude, like bro, yo, bro, and they're trying to be like frat bros as women. I always find that very disgusting, even when I see this among, like, one thing most people hate watching female sports, women's sports. Sometimes it's on at the gym, and I can't change the channel. And I always find it really disgusting, especially when they like do something well and they try to like bellow and like, yeah, like a man. And it's just like, this is disgusting. I really hate that. It's like it's same with like women's MMA. It's like, it's not like claiming that they're wimps or something. It's like, I just find it disgusting. That's not what women are supposed to do in our society. But Barstool Sports encourages that. Not the type of like bellowing, but like imitating bro behavior. Bros would go like, oh man, I banged some chicks last night, bro. That's so awesome. And well, these girls do that with changing chicks to guys, and that's like their behavior now. And so it's what they do. And there's this clip of this Barstool podcast where this girl was talking about how much money she's making through OnlyFans. And I think even I brought that up when I did my exploration of Barstool and their culture and how this is like back in September that I watched some of these clips and how normal America. And like the thing that really horrified me was like how normal they just accepted OnlyFans. Like on Twitter, like OnlyFans is seen as this like terrible, correctly is seen as this terrible thing. But like on Barstool Sports and like other podcasts, it's just like a normal thing. Like, oh, do you subscribe to our OnlyFans? Like they're just asking like, oh, did you watch the game last night? It was like in that casual manner. It's like there's nothing wrong with subscribing to OnlyFans or doing OnlyFans. And this one girl who did it, and she's not particularly hot. And in the podcast, also, these women are dressed like shit. They look like they just rolled out of bed and they're hungover. They're wearing hoodies. Like, it's gross. They're not looking, and they're intentionally doing this because the women who are watching this are also hungover and wearing hoodies and listening to it, and they're trying to create like we're on the same level as our fans who are watching this. Maybe I should do that with my fans. It's like I dress up. I wear like a K-On shirt. So if I did a video element, I'm like, look, I'm showing myself as just like my fans. They're into K-On too. But they're there and they're talking, and this girl's like, yeah, I was like making 150K to 150K with OnlyFans, and I did like a hard launch, and then like I saw this girl who did like a TikTok, and she's like, my day in the life of a sex worker, and I was like, oh my god, I should do that too. And then I made a vlog and I got so much more subscribers. And I'm like making 350K a month. And the girl's like, bro, what are you doing with that money? You're going to like Harry Styles concerts? And they're like, cruises? And like, bro, cruises are cheap. What are you doing with all that money? And it's like, and most of them are just like, this has like a massive audience. Like those Barstool podcasts have like huge audiences, way bigger audiences than probably anything coming from conservative media. And a much younger audience too. Like it's like it's like girls who are in their 20s and 30s who are listening to that. And probably even some like teenagers who are listening to that too. And this is like creating the model for them. And it's like, first off, there's like, wow, it's over moment. Like, wow, this country is really messed up. But it's also the fact that I think it really dispels this notion that conservatives have about what's going on. Like, they always try to portray women as victims, whether they're doing OnlyFans or whether they're doing porn or something. It's like the women have no agency in this at all. Is that they're the real victims here, even though they're making $350K a month. Is that no, women have the agency, and they just feel that like just doing these photos and videos that they can make a million. You know, they can become millionaires overnight. Is that they're just going to do it. And like due to the America, you know, everyone in America being united by the pursuit of the dollar. I mean, a lot of people want to talk about other virtues, but I mean, America is the way it is because everyone is here trying to make as much money as possible. And America, unlike other countries, this is the land of prosperity. This is where you seek your fortune in whatever way you can. And now these OnlyFans cam girls make their fortune through that. Unfortunately. And so they're pursuing it. And like a lot of these women are in the whole podcast, there's no like question that this girl should not do OnlyFans. Like they were all supportive of it. They were just like, bro, that's cool. That's hip, man. It's like you just got like a side income, like some guys making a lot of money, you know, doing lawn work or something. That's how they treated her, you know, doing OnlyFans. And that's really being promoted to these women. And they're not getting a counter message, but I think a lot of conservatives just feel that like they're still the victims, they're human smuggling, sex trafficking. It's like, no, these women want to do it. That's an unfortunate factor. And we can blame society and the culture for that, but you know, they do have a degree of agency. And the unfortunate factor is that a lot of these women are willingly signing up for it. And there's not really a social force to tell them that it's wrong. I mean, you know, even maybe it'll limit their attractiveness to a high value male, but maybe not. Who knows? I mean, some of these guys will just accept that, and you know, it's willing to go out in normie culture and experience it. And I always say, like, people are always like, "Oh, you guys just need to touch grass and realize how everything's fine out there." And actually, any experience like touching grass, like watching like the big budget movies, watching like what's on TV, watching the advertisements, watching the messaging that you just see in these popular podcasts that are not political, and you're just like, wow, this is a foreign country. This is like very alien to my values and what I believe in. So touching grass is almost more willing to create black pills than being on Twitter, even though, but we got to avoid black pills. Even though some people have been saying I've been blackpilling too much, maybe this podcast has been a black pill today with the OnlyFans, but I was just watching it, and it's like, yes, a lot of these women, you know, they complain about men all the time. They complain about how horrible they are, and they're just playing video games. And it's like, you see the imbalance that is happening right now with women. And it also goes to this point that I made in another podcast. Actually, I would need to bring up the other video just to bring this up, because this is about a different topic. There's like this woman who went on a date in New York City. I love these videos when they show them. And this woman, she's like, I want to date. I think she's like some type of foreign, because she had a weird accent. And she's like, I'm going to date. And this guy, we're there, and we're asking for burgers. And he asked how much extra the cheese is. And I'm just so horrified that I just paid the bill. Or I got up. I said, I need to use the restroom. I took my purse. And I went up to the waitress and I was like, I need to pay my bill. And she walked out on the guy, and she just sent a text message like, hi, I left. And you should have not asked about the cheese. And then I blocked him. And then you're like, you're just seeing this, and it's just like, and it goes to a lot, like a factor that I make with like women is like women have like a relationship advice, but women could just feel like if you ask for like how much extra the cheese is and don't want to pay the $3 extra, that's like a major ick factor, and they'll just like, and you know, they'll treat you like you're like a sex offender. If that, but you know, it goes along with the good men scarcity. Is that I want to make what these points that the conservatives make is that I always complain about these guys, like, you know, they're busy playing video games, they're not manning up, and then it's, you know, there's women out there who will, you know, act like you committed a grave offense by asking how much extra the cheese is at a restaurant and then saying, no, I'm good. And then that's like, you know, a mortal offense. Like this woman would do that. I mean, it's just like insanely rude to do that. But women do feel empowered to do this because, as I said, both in the OnlyFans thing and these ridiculous dates, is that the hard fact that we need to accept is that for a lot of these young women who are college educated, who are able to go to major metropolitan areas, life is very good for them. Life is very good for them, and they're the gays' most loyal subjects because they're able to live out this fantasy life that they wouldn't otherwise have. That they are able to make six figures, like, even though it's a very small minority, they're able to make six figures on OnlyFans and not face any social repercussions or social opprobrium for that. They're able to go on dates and they're able to cut off the date and just like totally crush the guy just for a insanely minor thing like asking about the cheese. And there's just like tons of girls who do this too. And you just have to say to yourself, it's like a lot of these women, they don't want the trad lifestyle. They do not want to have the wife the live the wife lifestyle. You know, and maybe they don't even want to have kids. Is that they feel that this life is just so awesome that is before them that they're able to live out these fantasies of travel the world, go on cruises, you know, do the eat, pray, love experience wherever they want, and all this. And that's what the gay offers them as long as they get a college education, and they don't even really need to work very hard to achieve their dreams. So, you know, when conservatives complain about the good men, scarcity, and how all these evil men are exploiting women and that stuff, I think it'd make more sense for conservatives to worry about what's happening to women than with men. Like, with men, it's like, oh, they're busy playing video games, they're doing all this stuff. They're doing that to escape from real life that's just, like, miserable for them. And they're not even very happy by retreating from life. But for women, you know, they're doing OnlyFans, they're doing all this ridiculous stuff, and, like, and being insanely picky with their dates and other things. It's like that's probably leading to a lot more of this social problems than what the lack of good men are doing. But everyone just like complains about this, and it leads to issues that coming out of the discourse. One funny thing I want to add to the discourse of this is, I guess it deals with relationships and stuff, is that Lauren Boebert. We have a lot of news topics, so this is coming through. There's just a lot of events that I want to briefly mention. Is that Lauren Boebert announced she will be a grandmother at 36. She just turned 36 in December, and he's now 17, but he's turning 18 soon. Son is having a baby, and he is it's out of wedlock, obviously, and the mother of the child I think was 15 when it was conceived and is 16 now. They're not planning on marrying, but Lauren Boebert once announced how excited she is to be a grandma. So this is a little bit of an interesting dynamic that's happening. Obviously, teen pregnancy has usually been frowned upon in society, especially when they're not getting married and it's out of wedlock, and it's usually behavior we've not wanted to encourage. And it's happened before with teen pregnancies. I mean, the most famous example is Sarah Palin's daughter, Bristol Palin, when she was running for vice president in 2008. Bristol Palin was 17 and was going to have her child at 18. And they made the couple get married to, you know, negate the political problems with that. But it was seen as like something to frown upon. Even conservatives like John McCain's staff thought that it's like may alienate social conservatives by having, you know, teen pregnancy at that time. Well, they should have just waited till 14 or 15 years later when all the conservatives are like, this is awesome that she's having a teen pregnancy. Like, let's celebrate Boebert. And like, it's not the worst thing in the world, you know, and they can make it work. But it's not behavior you want to necessarily encourage. And I think liberals are being a little hard on Boebert for this. You know, shit happens. It's behavior you want to avoid, but, you know, you can make it work. But, I mean, with this situation that happens, especially with, you know, even if you look at the Bristol Palin situation, you know, Bristol Palin has had a lot of troubles with relationships and with her own children, being a single mom of 3. I mean, she got the marriage she was supposed to have with the baby daddy when she was 18 didn't work out, didn't pan out. She then had another child out of wedlock with a man she was about to engaged with. And she was older. She was in her mid-20s, I think, at the time. And then she had another child, and then they had a messy divorce. And with that person that she married, and so she's now a single mom of 3 at 32, actually. And you know that maybe that's not the ideal situation. And even in this case, this woman at 16 is going to be a single mom at 16 because they're not marrying. And it's probably likely that, they'll provide child support. The Boebert family will provide some degree of child support, but they're not going to provide a stable two-parent home for that child. They're not, this is not, they're also, if you, teenagers in general have never been prepared for adulthood, but maybe they are parenthood, but maybe they can be. Zoomers, especially, I'm horrified by the prospect of teen pregnancy of that. And so this is not behavior, you can be like, oh, as it happens, it's glad that they chose life and hopefully they can make it work, but it's also behavior you don't want to encourage. And I find that like conservatives, in a way to own the libs, have decided that this is awesome and we need to encourage this more. And they're like, at least it's awesome that she's a grandmother 36 and that and Boebert's like, her whole life has been a little bit trashy. I mean, young people can have children at any time and not be trashy, but Boebert has had ridiculous criminal charges, against her. Her husband was like, did public exposure. There's been domestic abuse accusations and all this stuff. And Boebert is a straight up idiot too. Even though she may be good on some policies, but we have to admit that Boebert is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But I think the overall point is that I'm seeing way too many people, right-wingers and conservatives, reflexively defend and then celebrate this teen pregnancy, which teen pregnancies, especially in our society, yes, it may have been the norm 102 years ago, but that was very different. And also in that situation, they would have forced the 18-year-old to marry the 16-year-old, not to, not marry him and have a single mom at 16. It's very different from that's a very different situation from a rural village and, 1850s France or somewhat. It's a very different situation than we're having right now. And even though it may be the norm, it's not the norm today. And conservatives generally have tried to prevent teen pregnancy. But now we're for it just to own the bugman. And, there's another specific demographic that has a lot of teen pregnancy. And they're not very conservative. They're not voting Republican. And that leads to a lot of problems because it has a single mom. And generally the single mom can't take care of her. The child, and then it's left to the mother, or even that now with blacks, they just have so many generations of the immediate parents not taking care of it, that it's like up to the great-grandmother, or even great-great-grandmother, who's taking care of the kids, taking care of like 3 generations of children, and like, because they keep having these pregnancies where, some guy knocks them up, doesn't marry them, that person's incapable of raising the child, and then it's given to the grandmother. Now, I don't say that this is going to be as bad as that situation, but it's a situation we want to avoid, and that's why we've tried to limit teen pregnancy. I mean, now, in our situation where we're seeing so many people not have children ever, that we see somebody having children and we reflexively defend it or celebrate it. I don't think defending is different from it. Their choice to have a child is, that's something else. But I think celebrating it is the real problem, is that you don't want to celebrate teen pregnancy, encourage it for other people. You want to have these people, at least adults, at least having the intention of getting married. Even if they weren't married when they were conceived, they have a shotgun wedding. They come together to form a family unit so they can have a stable household or raise children, and they'll make things work, which is not happening in a Boebert case. And I think it's just very odd that Boebert would celebrate herself becoming a grandmother, and then conservative right-wing media, due to the fact that we're just not having pregnancies in general, and that this has been found a way to own the liberal bugman, that they've reflexively just turned this into a point of celebration. This is awesome, and that more people should do this. It's like, you can't complain about sex before marriage and then like celebrate a 17-year-old knocking up a 15-year-old. It's a little bit conflicted messaging you're giving out there, but I hope it works out. I hope the best for that child. I mean, it happens. It's good that they chose life rather than abortion. But it's not behavior you want to celebrate or encourage, because you can see that behavior happen a lot in certain other communities, and that contributes a lot of the problems to those communities. So you want to avoid that, and you don't want to descend into it. But hopefully it all works out. But I just found it very weird that all these conservatives have decided to reflexively encourage and celebrate it just to own the libs. When even back in the Bristol Palin era and the Sarah Palin era, like, conservatives were a little bit, this is a little weird. Even though at that time they were trying to say, oh, they're getting married, they're that. And they were both older. I mean, they were both 18 when they had the child. And they were 17 when it was conceived, 18 when they had it, and they were planning to get married. But even then, like, conservatives were like, maybe Sarah Palin should have been focused more on helping her daughter make the right decisions. But now it's like, wow, Lauren Boebert is an awesome mom. Which who knows? That's the opinion of some right-wing media. So moving along to the next topic, yes, we're having rapid fire topics because there's just so much to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about the Oscars. I don't want to make this too long, but there's just funny things with the Oscars. They complained that I think it was Best Supporting Actress did not go to a black actress from one of the Wakanda movies. I guess it was Wakanda Forever. And it's ridiculous that it's a superhero movie. Then the Best Picture went to the Asian-made superhero movie, Everything, Everywhere at Once, which I just watched the previews of it. It's like, this movie looks like the most idiotic movie I've ever seen. Why this is winning is just because they're like, we need to support more Asian films. And this is like, oh, Michelle Yeoh is, or whatever, I don't give a shit how to pronounce her name, is so powerful in this movie as an Asian maid who becomes a superhero. And it's they're worried about an actress not winning an Oscar for the anti-colonialist, anti-white black superhero movie, which that film was filled with anti-colonialists. And then the movie that won Best Picture, I don't know if it's particularly anti-white, but it's the Asian-made superhero movie. And then for the best song, this is more important, is that this song called Natu Natu, from the movie RRR, which was one of the highest grossing films last year. It's insanely anti-white. Even this music video is anti-white. The movie follows two Indian superheroes. I mean, they're able to do feats that are a little bit beyond human capability. But Indian movies are so ridiculous. They're all like, they make Fast and the Furious look like a Kubrick film of like how idiotic and fast-paced action there are and just unrealistic things that happen. And so it's about like these two anti-colonialist revolutionaries who go on a mission to rescue some young girl who's kidnapped by the British. And the British, in the opening scene, the British kidnap this girl. They're like, I want that girl. And they're like, okay. And then the mother fights them, and then British soldiers beat the mother to death in front of her child to show how evil they are. And the whole movie is about these two Indian guys killing whites throughout the whole movie who are seen as evil. And even the song, it's about these guys. I guess they're disrupting some type of white party or something, and there's a guy who's like getting mad about their dancing and music, and then the white woman is like, oh, don't worry about it, Edward. I don't know what the guy's name is. Like, oh, I like their music, they're just so awesome. And then it's like a white woman getting wooed by these two Indian guys doing this ridiculous song and dance. And that's Hollywood now. It's not like Hollywood's always been leftist, but they are starting to encourage these more anti-colonialist, anti-white themes, and they clearly just let this movie I don't give it everywhere, everything at once win, because it's like they have to promote Asian self-pride of some sort. And the whole movie, they're like, I want, when the actress won her award, she's like, I want people who look like me know that they can do whatever they want. And I also want to let them know that women are never past their prime to own Don Lemon. Like, everyone's wanting to own Don Lemon now. That would be another talk about the Don Lemon, but I have so many other topics. I still have another topic to talk about before cognitive elite questions, so we will not talk about Don Lemon, but it is funny how everyone is uniting to hate Don Lemon for his past her prime thing, where we're now having to lie to ourselves that women who are in their 50s are still well in their prime, which they're not, but based Don Lemon is like, he was saying that and saying, because they're like, she's young. And it's like, no, she's in her 50s now. Nikki Haley is, that is. And the Asian actress, I think she's close to 60, or she is 60. So it's funny that that's not like the messaging now celebrated by Hollywood. We're going to see more of these anti-colonialist tripe, not just coming from India, but from elsewhere, being celebrated at the Oscars. And that's a little bit worse than other left-wing stuff, because it encourages an explicitly anti-white message and is celebrating the murder of whites, which both the new Black Panther movie did. It's actually non-whites coming together to fight against white colonialists. And clearly what this RRR movie did with showing how barbaric and monstrous whites are, and then celebrating these two Indian guys, like blowing them up. So that's something. That's my takeaway from the Oscars. Very brief. Now the final subject before the cognitive elite question is a very goofball protest that happened over the weekend. It happened in Akron, Ohio. There was about to be a drag show for kids, and a lot of people from the right came to protest it, but it was different groups of the right came to protest, and obviously there was like the pro drag queen people there as well with their rainbow colored umbrellas. And there was an interesting assortment of people that came. There was this group that I had never heard of called Blood Tribe that showed up in red jackets and matching red jackets and swastika flags. Great optics. And they began saying Sieg Heil. Like they were at like a football game, you know, like when people are like defense, they're like going Sieg and then saying Heil. And I was like, man, this is... I'm sure this is really going to win over the people. It is like complete ridiculousness. And there's like all these ridiculous groups there. That's just Blood Tribe. And even the Blood Tribe, like all the other normal right-wing goobers who were there didn't like them. And the non-Nazi people were also pretty goofy. There was an instance of violence where some of the pro-drag show people maced a guy in full chainmail who's pretending to be a crusader, and you're just looking at this event, and it's like all these people talk about like the Civil War and rising political tensions and all this stuff, and then you look at these battles, and they're just like battles between goobers, like the total goofballs. Like no sensible person would want to be caught dead anywhere near this event at all, even if they have a problem with the drag show. Like the opposing side to it looks so ridiculous and idiotic that you're just like, I don't want to be associated with these people. I don't want to be associated with these clowns, like with face tattoos who are coming out and shouting Sieg Heil and using like the worst optics imaginable. I don't want to be. Why is this guy dressed in chainmail? This is not 11th century Jerusalem. Okay, you know, we're not on a crusade here. Why are these people just like, and people always do these as like dressed as clown show, and then like the other side are clearly clowns too, and you just see these like events and you're just like, no, it's like, it doesn't involve like ordinary people. It just involves like goobers on both sides like fighting each other, even though the event itself should not be held. The only people who will show up to protest, I'm sure there were some normal people there to protest, but those weren't the people gaining attention. It was all the clowns who were there to be there. And then like the no matter what the message of the opposing side to the drag show is, it was marred by these clownish Hollywood villain neo-Nazis who showed up. And you're just looking at this and you're just like, man, this is like, you know, that's why like good optics is something very clear there. You know, you really do have to worry about optics. You really have to worry about how you're presenting yourself to the American public. And even if you're not dressed up as a Nazi, it's like, why are you dressed in chainmail at this thing? Like, this is not a live action role play. This is like supposed to be a serious protest where you're supposed to demonstrate that you are like you're an ordinary American and you're expressing the frustration of ordinary Americans. Ordinary Americans are not dressing up as in chainmail and pretending they're a crusader. So yeah, I was just looking at that. I guess whenever I just see like people are like the Civil War is happening, it's like really it's just like these goofball events that look like a Comic-Con a fight. It's like a fight broke out of the Comic-Con. It's like, and most people are just like, these people are ridiculous. They're not even threatened by them. They're just like, these people are just such clowns. We don't want to have anything to do with them. And that's always what I would say. It was like, people are like, there's rising level of violence. And the rising level of violence is a dude with a rainbow umbrella macing a guy in chainmail. And you're just like, that doesn't pertain to people outside of that sphere, outside of the Comic-Con battle. So I just wanted to get that in. These are like just little short little quips I wanted to make before I got into the Cognitive Elite questions. So I've already answered some Cognitive Elite questions, but I'm going to do the reminder again. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com, and make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. And these last two questions both come from New England refugee. The first question, he's asking about the Great Sorting. He's talking about how I've destroyed the National Force and Civil War memes for a long time. And he's asking about what about conservatives moving from hopelessly blue states like California and New England to swing red states. In my opinion, the GOP should encourage this as much as possible. If half the conservatives in NYC or San Fran moved to Georgia and voted last election, Trump would have won. What are your thoughts? I think it's fine. I am actually supportive of internal migration. And I think that's That is a good thing. I think there is a lot of that has happened. COVID really has accelerated that to an extent, and I support that. But one funny thing is like the great sorting is that conservatives can't get their messaging right. Is that Marjorie Taylor Greene popularized this idea, but this is found among a lot of these people who advocate national divorce, is that if you move from the blue state, you should lose your voting rights for 5 years when you move to a red state. And the real problem isn't blue staters moving to a lot of these red states, is that in 2018, when there was a very close election in Texas, this is probably the closest statewide election Texas has had in a long time, between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. Ted Cruz did better among people who were not born in Texas versus those who were born in Texas. So a lot of the people who are moving there are conservatives. And a lot of these people who are advocating this just moved to blue states themselves. Like I think David Reeboy, who advocates this, just moved to Florida 2 years ago. And I think even Michael Ballas and some of these other people advocated it. It's like, you guys, that would count you. You know, they're not like, well, I would get an exemption by being a base exemption. It's like, no, you wouldn't have a base exemption. So there's a lot of those fears that like people are like, oh, our real enemy are transplants. And you see this a lot from the people out in like places like Idaho and Wyoming and stuff. And they're like, my real enemy isn't the illegal immigrant. It's the Californian coming here raising my home price, bringing their foreign ways. Like, and it's like, what foreign ways are it's just like, it's just a safer target for them to attack Californians than it is illegal immigrants. And so they like to believe that those are the problem. Even though most of the Californians moving to these places like Idaho and Wyoming are very conservative, they like to blame them for all those issues. So I support it, especially with like what's coming out with COVID and other things. You know, moving for a lot from those states is a good idea, and moving to a state that, you know, there is a great sorting going on. The long-term implications of it, I still haven't made up my mind about, but I think it's fine to move to a red state. But that also undermines the idea of national divorce and civil war and stuff. Is like, if the solution to the problems that you're having in New York or California is just a move, you know, that's a very different situation from what people may impact. Is that you can still go out to a red state and have a much better life than you can in a blue state. And most people don't want to go to the next step to just have their own separate country when they can just move to a different place. So that is the answer to his first question. The second question is about how much it would pay to deal with diversity. He talked about how he said he knew somebody who worked at a school that had a lot of diversity, and this person got paid more to work there. But he apparently, you know, he said, you know, there's much higher degree of standards for what you can say in school, and he got reported for something that was minor, but they felt that it was offensive, and he went there. And then he said that the problem, it didn't matter because it was a hellish school anyway. And he asked, how much money is worth being around magic, or is it just not worth it? I would answer the question, it's just not worth it. They do pay a lot for those schools, but I mean, it doesn't matter how much you pay. Even this can just go with jobs. Like, if every day is hell, it doesn't matter. And if you're teaching a school, you're not going to be making like $250K. Okay, you're not going to be making so much that it could be worth it. But if every day of your life is hell on earth and just like complete demoralizing, complete blackpilling, it is just not worth it. And that's like the same with, like, I think White's is like why white flight happened, is that they just felt, you know, it doesn't matter how much more money they're getting paid. It's the same with like people living in cities. It's like it's more convenient for them to live in a city to be near their work, but they feel it's not worth it due to the crime and the terrible schools. They feel that they'd rather have a 50-minute commute versus, you know, maybe a walking commute just to have better schools and a better quality of life, even though they would make more money. You know, they're having to pay more to earn that. So it's not worth it. And I think whites have made that choice, and no matter how much money they funnel into these schools, it's just not worth it. I think it's an interesting experience. Like, I knew some people who did Teach for America. I mean, out of college and stuff, you know, you don't really know what you're doing, and maybe spending 2 years in a in a poor school is an eye-opening experience. It's more of an education you get in college. Even though I think most of the people who come out of Teach for I was about Teach for Libs. That's really what I could say. I think Teach for America would be shit libs, but it can really shock you about like how this country operates and how the other side that you may not interact, lives. And so, but I would say it's not worth it. But it's worth experiencing just for a little bit to understand about what you have to avoid. Scott Adams was right. Scott Adams was right. It's just not worth it, and that's my opinion as well. So that's it for today's Highly Respected. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And we're going to have another incredible IQ supplement later this week, maybe on topics that we didn't get to cover today. There's a lot of topics that happened this week, and there's probably going to be new news topics. And next week, we're going to do a retrospective on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. So it will not be about current events, so that may make us have another episode to talk about current affairs and events, especially if we had another crazy news week or things that I want to talk about, and I know I'm not going to be able to get to it on Monday. And that's why we had some shortened discussions on some of these topics I would have liked to discuss. And there's other topics I really wanted to discuss today too, but I'm probably going to do those as columns or maybe even an IQ supplement instead of bringing this up on the podcast. So be on the lookout for all this great content. And so until next time, stay respected.